Far Cry 4 dropped a whole decade ago, and it's somehow still remembered as one of the best games in the franchise. But is it actually worth playing now, when there are newer Far Cries and endless other open world games you can play instead? Well, I've been racking up the hours lately, and this is going to be my brutally honest breakdown of what still holds up, what doesn't, and whether Far Cry 4 really is worth it in 2025. So before we even touch the gameplay, we have to talk about the visuals, and whether this game performs well or not. And honestly, aside from something that really pissed me off and almost prevented this video from being made, more about that in a moment, the visuals really did surprise me, and it holds up far better than you'd expect. Despite what people say about Ubisoft, during the period around 2014 to 2015, they made games with insane visuals that still hold up now, and I have no idea how they did it. Yes, it may not be pushing ray tracing or Unreal Engine 5 detail, but it really doesn't need to, and just look at these graphics, I mean, for Christ's sake. Visually, this honestly doesn't feel like a 10-year-old game, and that is one hell of a start. Graphics aside, there's one thing that seriously pissed me off right off the bat: the controller support. If you go into the pause menu and see a section called Gamepad, it's safe to assume that the PC version supports God to hell controller. Well, wrong. For some utterly bizarre reason, controllers on the PC version do not work at all, and I'm utter dog with keyboard and mouse, so this nearly made me rage quit the whole thing. But if you're stubborn like me and you really want to use a controller, here's the fix: add Far Cry 4 manually to Steam, force Steam controller input, and launch in big picture mode, and that is the only workaround. That issue aside, performance was actually solid for the most part, and things were off to a promising start. But what about the actual gameplay? Now this is where things get interesting, because the gameplay in Far Cry 4 really did surprise me in ways I wasn't really expecting. Before I even began my first gunfight, I immediately loved how the stealth works. Yes, it's not as advanced as games now, but that's kind of why I love it. Throwing some of your mum's shitty leftovers and watching bears maul enemies in front of you is just as satisfying as it once was. Instead of Ubisoft's highly advanced and often frustrating stealth in Assassin's Creed Shadows, enemies give you a lot of leeway. Yes, this means stealth is rather simple and easy for the most part, but I actually love it for that reason, and maybe I've just been playing too much of Assassin's Creed Shadows, but it was a refreshing experience, and controls don't feel clunky or stiff like other games from 2014. But what really sets Far Cry 4 apart is what the sandbox free roam allows you to do. You're not just walking into a base and gunning people down. You can climb mountains, scout with your camera, disable alarms, and sneak in with a silenced bow, or just run in loud, unleashing wild animals onto the poor gobshites. I also just love how animals interact with you and the NPCs. There were genuine moments where I almost shat my pants, like when I had to retrieve something from a grizzly bear's cave.
God damn it.
The atmosphere and tension was seriously there, and I absolutely love it. Although the random god to hell bird attacks suck a bag of dicks. When I did get into gunfights, I was happily surprised by how responsive it feels. Yes, it's not going to be outdoing Call of Duty's gun mechanics anytime soon, but murking bullets into skulls feels satisfying, and taking cover works as it should. And for a game that released over a decade ago, I was expecting gunfights to feel dated. The various amount of weapons are also very impressive, and I found myself going from a typical bummed Call of Duty noob to making Guy Fawkes proud rather quickly. It's just really fun. Also, Ubisoft are concentrated horse dung at developing good driving mechanics in their third-person games, but in this, driving actually feels pretty decent. And I also love the selection of vehicles. You've got trucks, boats, ATVs, and my personal favourite, the one-man helicopter that looks more knackered than old Bint's chuff. And maybe I'm just a sad twat, but I loved looking around at the views of the map when you're on this thing. It's truly rod-on worthy. Yes, I did encounter the odd bug here and there, but not often or game-breaking. And this universe's version of The Flash is pretty unique, to be fair. And Christ, for its age, the game mechanics really do feel timeless. Aside from maybe the climbing, that does feel a little bit clunky, but it's not awful by any means. And one thing I don't think many videos have pointed out is how good and entertaining the physics are in this game. Blowing cars to smithereens is so damn fun, crashing your vehicle looks realistic, and I still hold the title for the most hit and runs in the fictional setting of Karat. I also find it hilarious how NPCs driving around the map are trying to outdo me. And speaking of the setting, I forgot just how big this map is. I mean, look at the size of it. But here's the thing, it's not just big for the sake of being big. Unlike recent open world games that sometimes feel absolutely empty, Far Cry's 4 map feels dense and alive. And there's always something happening, like wild animals attacking villagers or random gunfights breaking out. And to me, it just feels unscripted and unpredictable, which I personally really appreciate in open world games. And to be honest, I think it's one of the most iconic and immersive worlds in the series. But the missions and story are just as important. And how do they hold up? And if you're enjoying this video so far, hit that subscribe button because over 90% of you aren't subscribed. It's free, helps the channel, and I'd personally love for you to stick around and join the 5%. Before talking about whether the missions feel dated, we have to talk about one of the most important aspects of these games, the villain. Vaas will always be known as the best villain in the franchise that hasn't really been topped since, but honestly, this game's villain really isn't that far behind. Far Cry 4 does something a little different, and you're not just another soldier dropped into a war zone. You're Ajay, an American returning to your birthplace to scatter your dead as a doornail mother, and you quickly get swept into a full-blown civil war between two factions, whilst quickly meeting the game's villain, Pagan, and he's played by Troy Baker, which is a recipe for success right from the start, as Troy has to be one of the best game voice actors in the business. And honestly, I think Pagan is one of the most memorable villains in the entire Far Cry series, due to how well he's written and his unique personality, which is given plenty of screen time through the various cutscenes and even through the game's radio as you're free roaming.
Let's see how much Kanye is going for. Do you follow him on Twitter? He's gold.
And I personally think he's far more interesting than any other recent villain we've seen. But what about the missions? In typical Far Cry fashion, they mainly consist of go to this base, clear out a bunch of knobheads, and rinse and repeat. But let's not forget, this was before it was milked pissless about 60 games later. However, despite this game being 10 years old, I still enjoyed the missions and found them very satisfying for the most part, thanks to the addictive gameplay we discussed earlier and varied ways to wipe out enemies. But there is one thing I have a problem with, and that is the supporting characters. Yeah, that's a sight I never want to see again. The saggy-titted alcoholic hag aside, the characters are just as boring as I remember, and their names are forgotten faster than your last piss. Now, I do like how the game allows you to choose which character to side with, which then dictates the missions you'll play, but I hate how Ajay just doesn't seem to question anything like a little bitch, and essentially becomes a puppet. I've always thought about how cool this game would be if you had the choice to go against these boring pricks and had the option to side with Pagan instead. I mean, that would have been really interesting. So don't expect some Red Dead Redemption level storytelling, but if you're after something fun, over the top, with a villain who pretty much steals the show, I do think you'll enjoy the story and its missions. So with all this in mind, is Far Cry 4 worth playing in 2025 when there are more recent installments you could pick up instead? To be brutally honest, there is one flaw with Far Cry 4 that became more and more apparent as I racked up the hours, and that's the fact that despite it being 10 years old, it still shows up how bad and stale the recent games really are, and I would prefer to play this 100 times over. And although myself and many others would agree that Far Cry 3 is technically the best game in the franchise, I would actually recommend playing this one over any other. If you're someone who's never played it before, I would definitely give it a go, and if you have played it and it's been a while, it's 100% worth a replay. And if you do want to pick up this game for yourself, I will leave a link down below where you can grab it super cheap at Instant Gaming. But what's your favourite Far Cry game, and where does Far Cry 4 rank for you? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'm actually pretty curious to know what you think. And to find out what it was like to play the worst rated Far Cry game in the series, make sure to click the card on screen. You don't want to miss this video. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.